Casino workers, what's the highest amount someone lost? What happened? Finally, a question I can answer. I work in a well-known casino in Las Vegas. It happens multiple times per week that we get high rollers in who win or lose over $1 million. The most I ever saw a person lose was about $9 million in one night. But while that may seem like an obscene amount of money to you or I, that's what he budgeted himself to gamble that trip. He came knowing he may lose $9 million. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't happy, but he didn't lose his mind, or freak out or anything like that.
It's interesting how some people handle big losses. Losing $9 million is a lot, but if that's part of their plan, it's a different mindset. They probably understand the risks involved and accept the outcome more easily. It shows how varying attitudes towards money can be.
Dealer, not in Vegas but still considered a large casino. The most heartbreaking losses always come from naive college kids or the regular single parents, but the largest loss I've ever seen was pretty entertaining. There's a regular at our casino that owns his own company but also used to scam other casinos by having an inside man at his bank confirm credit over the phone that the player did not have. He's since been busted for this and will definitely be sent to jail once the case is closed. He still has a ton of cash and plays at our casino, being the only one in the area that allows him inside. A few weeks after he was caught, he came to our casino with 4 briefcases of $250,000 each and said, "I'm not leaving until the sign outside says, insert player's name, casino." Super upbeat and happy guy. Really nice to the dealers, probably so he wouldn't get kicked out. After 5 hours, my shift was over and he was down $720,000. The smile on his face looked like he found the money in between his couch cushions.
That's a wild story. The guy shows up with that much cash and still loses a ton. Insane how some people can take losses like that and not seem to care. Makes you wonder what goes through their minds. Staying nice to the dealers is smart too, gotta keep the peace. I guess if you've got that much to throw around, losing isn't as big a deal.
I manned the roulette wheel for about 6 months back in my college days, and the most amount of money I ever saw someone lose was $2,500. He put $100 on 22 different numbers, red, even, and second half. I'll never forget his face with 0 showed up. The most amount of money I ever saw someone win was around $12,000 or so, give or take. It was around Christmas time, and a group from a business Christmas party came in. The boss gave everyone $100 and she came over, put $100 on 13, just wanting to get rid of it and get home. 13, $3,500 instant win. She takes $3,400 back, and puts $100 on 25. 25, another $3,400 net gain. I forget the third number, but she did it again. She then put $500 on one of the colors, forget which, and about the same on the thirds, forget which. She won the thirds, lost the color, and had me call security over to escort her to cash in her sips. This took her no time, at all. She was very excited, talking about how much this money would help her.
Losing $2,500 must have been tough for that guy, especially with that setup. On the flip side, that woman really cleaned up. Winning around $12,000 like that, right before Christmas, is a nice turn of events. It's interesting how quickly fortunes can change at the roulette wheel. Overall, sounds like you had some memorable moments.
Ex-croupier from Sydney. Dude turned over about 20 mil in 20 minutes. He was just there because it was uni enrollment time for his son, so decided to shout them a fun time in the inner sanctums. Another dude lost maybe $700K and didn't care. His bag man showed me photos of the private jet they travel in, which had a full-sized queen bed in it. Pretty awesome. Since I'm white, I didn't really get to deal much in the inners. But if the players lose, they just kick you out and ask for a luckier dealer. Usually an Asian female.
The story gives a glimpse into high-stakes gambling and the dynamics involved. The contrast between the two guys is interesting. One showering his son with a good time while the other loses a significant amount without a care. The private jet detail adds a luxurious touch. It's a different world, especially with the preference for certain dealers based on luck. Definitely an intriguing perspective from someone who's been on the inside.
I dealt blackjack for a few months at an Iowa casino. A guy was staying at our hotel for a week on business and would play at my table at night because we had some good conversations and he had a few really good runs me. On his last hand one night he put down $500. Hit 2 8s against me showing a 6. He split them. On the first one he got a 3 and doubled down. Drew a 4 or 5. Second he got a 2 and doubled down on it as well and got another mediocre hand. I forgot what I had exactly, but I ended up drawing like 5 cards and not busting and taking $2,000 from him. He laughed and tipped me a couple of black chips, $200. I would have felt bad if I thought he couldn't afford it. We definitely had some people like that, but I got the impression he was doing just fine.
Seems like an interesting night. The guy was confident with that $500 bet. Splitting 8s can be risky, but he went for it anyway. You hitting 5 cards without busting is pretty lucky. The $2,000 win must have been a surprise for him, but at least he tipped you well. Sounds like a decent guy who could handle the loss.
First off, a little background. Casinos in Asia are rumored to rent out tables, which means someone can pay the casino for the right to take a percentage of winnings from that table over a period of time. Basically it's money laundering. During my many trips to Macau and the Philippines I've watched people gamble away millions every hour over days, and the only reason I can attribute their behavior is to this type of money laundering. In the 2000s this was very common to see in Macau. Acrylic-covered gold plaques worth Hong Kong dollars $100,000 thrown across the table like $2 chips over a game of baccarat many times over. The first time I saw it happen I counted the amount rebought at $10 million, which he lost in minutes right after he had just lost a stick in similar size. When I went back a few days later he was still there doing the exact same thing. The amount he lost/laundered easily broke into hundreds of millions if not more.
It's interesting how money laundering works through gambling. Seeing someone lose large sums like that can be unsettling. The whole scene in Macau must be wild, especially with people throwing around such high stakes. It's almost like a different reality where money doesn't seem to have the same value. Makes you wonder about the motivations behind it all and how far some people will go for a quick thrill.
Currently a dealer at a large casino in the US, not Vegas. I tap onto my blackjack game and this guy I'm dealing to tells me he is already down around 100k. He's a white guy, mid-50s or so, wearing a tacky plaid suit. He was betting 500-1k a hand, 2 hands every time. Over about 4 hours the guy floats between my table and the one next to me buying in 10k at a time. I gave him one good shoe the whole night so I was busting his head essentially the whole time. A couple times it took longer for me to count his buy-in than for me to put it in my rack. Shit, there were so many $100 bills in my money box it was getting tough to put the paddle in it. My floor tells me after he leaves that he lost 209k after it was all said and done. He treated it like how I would treat losing $1,000 maybe. He wasn't happy but he seemed like he could shrug it off. My floor was like yeah, I could pay off my entire mortgage with what he just lost. I died a little inside that day but it's not my money after all.
Dealing to someone who loses that much without much reaction is pretty wild. I can't imagine treating a big loss so casually. It's a lot of cash to just shrug off. But hey, at least it's not your money, right? Must have been interesting to watch how he handled it all, though.
I'm an analyst in a tribal-owned casino in a not very wealthy area so we don't see people losing in the millions, but we've got a few patrons that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars to us over the years. Most of them are local business owners, or were owners that have now sold their company for big profits. So spending that much money here, and presumably the same or more at our local competitors, doesn't seem to be a problem. One of our biggest players for about a year was a little old lady whose husband died and she didn't have anything else to spend the life insurance on, so she put a few $100,000 into us over the year. Once she finished off that amount she basically stopped playing altogether, she was just in it for the fun. She's spent enough though, and is a nice old lady, so most of the hosts comp her a free meal every once in a while, just to bring her in and check in on her. If she never spends another cent she's still one of our biggest players ever. Word of advice though, those folks you know who won a huge jackpot, and have made so much money gambling, and are big winners, well there's a really good chance that they're net negative when it comes to their spending here. We've had folks win $100,000 jackpots and still be $150,000 in the hole. That's how this works, you might have some big wins on occasion, but every game is advantageous to the house.
The old lady's story is a good example of that. It's more about entertainment for some, rather than just trying to win. It makes you wonder about the concept of winning and losing in gambling, especially when a jackpot doesn't really mean you're ahead in the long run. The house always seems to have the upper hand.
Ex-croupier here, probably a bit late to the party. I used to deal almost exclusively in VIP areas and private gaming rooms to international high rollers or top-tier level locals. The regulars that come at least every week don't tend to play that big, between $300 to $10,000 per hand, and there's a lot of spectating and walking around and socializing. However, it's a different story with the internationals. The casino allows them to have a much higher maximum bet, up to $600,000, and they get given their own private gaming room with only 1 or 2 tables that only they have access to. Most of the private rooms only contain baccarat tables, as that is what most of the high rollers prefer to play. The most I have ever seen anyone lose was this Malaysian guy I was dealing to in one of our private rooms that was actually connected to his penthouse suite in our 5-star hotel. He came to the table straight out of bed, still in his pajamas. He gulps down a cup of ginseng tea and slams $500,000 on the table, loses. Another bet, this time $600,000, loses again. 3 more hands continued the same way until he reduced his bet to $300,000 and he finally wins 1 hand. He is furious that he lost all his big bets and his only win was his small bet. Because of this I got kicked out from the room, and another dealer waiting outside for this exact reason comes to the table and replaces me. The player ended that day with a total loss of $9 million. He was staying at our casino for 1 week, and the next day I heard he lost another $10 million. The next few days he was up and down, but he did not come anywhere close to chasing back his losses. Since that trip, from what I have heard, he hasn't been back to our casino.
That's an interesting perspective. Dealing with high rollers sounds intense. Gotta wonder how that affects their lifestyle. Losing that kind of money has to sting, but it seems like some people just keep going.
I was a table games dealer for a while, and, honestly, the people who lose shitloads of money didn't really care. It was the regular Joes who would lose $300 in a night that would lose their shit. Their body language would change, and I could tell they were there to make money and ended up losing the money they needed to pay bills. These were the hardest. On the flip side, we would have a guy come in with bankrolls of hundreds and play for 3 hours, win or lose. Biggest tip that guy ever gave was $30.
The casual players seem to take it harder, especially when they're playing their bills. You can really see the stress on them. It's a different vibe altogether. Gives you a look into how money affects people in gaming.
Probably too late, but here's my story. I am not a dealer, but I was sitting by a guy who was playing blackjack at his own reserve table. He had stacks and stacks of $500 chips and was betting a few thousand per hand and losing almost all of them. Within 20 minutes I watched him lose over $10K and just pull out his wallet and grab a huge stack of $100 bills and throw them in the dealer's face. It was crazy because if anyone else did that they would get kicked out, but they didn't do anything to him because he was losing so much money. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in a casino. He eventually lost all the money and the floor manager comped him a room and walked him off the floor. Meanwhile I'm at the next table over betting $5 a hand, getting pissed when I lose.
That sounds wild. Watching someone drop so much cash and not get kicked out is rare. It's a strange vibe when the rules seem to bend for certain people. I can see how it would be frustrating to lose small amounts while he's just losing thousands without a care. The whole situation shows the highs and lows of gambling. It's a mix of thrill and chaos for sure.
I dealt a Pai-Gow game, like poker, but players play against the house instead of each other. Typically, you bet the minimum and the bonus. It's stupid not to. The bonus increases your odds to almost 50-50. Without bonus, the odds were closer to 40-60, bet $100 and you'd expect to get about 90 back, for instance. The game is very up and down, you win some and lose some and often don't go anywhere at all. A lady walks in, refuses to get the bonus, and proceeds to lose $10,000 cash faster than seems possible. She arrives at her last 2 chips with stunning speed, displaying the absolutely shittiest streak of bad luck I've ever seen. Against the rules, I suggest she bet the option with her last chip. She hits a straight flush, begins crying, and walks away with $20,000. Didn't tip.
That's an interesting scenario. The way that lady lost so quickly is surprising. It's tough when luck just isn't on your side. But hitting a straight flush like that at the last moment is a crazy turnaround. It's unfortunate she didn't tip after that win, though. You'd think a little gratitude would be in order after salvaging a big loss.
Long-time lurker and finally something I can answer. Worked as a croupier and in VIP/private suites for 4 years. Baccarat is the money game. Blackjack/roulette, you get people losing $100,000 to $200,000 betting up to $25,000 or so. A lot for me to lose, of course, but nothing compared to what you see in baccarat. Generally the max would be $500,000 per hand, but that's negotiable depending on the player. Someone losing $20 million wasn't uncommon. Someone losing $1 million, you wouldn't even be fazed. The reactions of the players varied greatly. People acted aggressive for losing $10 on a low-limit roulette but would laugh if they lost $100,000. In the private suites, the players were allowed to abuse the dealers a lot more than what would be ever allowed on the public gaming floor. So you take some shit and learn deal with it. Obviously nothing physical. Generally the higher limit players weren't too bad. A lot of death stares and abuse in their language. Drunk idiots or grumpy elderly were worse. Oddest thing was the requests. Young male, Asian female, white female, blonde, brunette, no Chinese, from Chinese players, no bald men, no facial hair. I remember once they literally ran out of croupiers because they had gone through them all. Oswell were the dealing requests. Turn the cards this way or that, only use that hand, don't speak, don't look at me. Got some really odd requests and you just did it. Superstitions becoming a joke after you see the ridiculousness of people.
Sounds like an interesting experience. Working in a high-stakes environment like that must have its ups and downs. I can see how you just have to roll with it. Those kinds of dynamics between players and dealers can get pretty intense, especially when big money is on the line.
I guess this isn't the most I've ever seen, but it's the worst. Casino dealers are notorious deegans. Usually they just gamble, drink, or drug their entire paychecks, then borrow money to float the bills and rinse and repeat until they win big, which floats their habit for a few weeks or months, or hit bottom. Anyways, I was day shift and it was about to change to evening shift. One of the dealers for evenings sat at my table a few minutes before he had to start his shift and bought in $10,000. He bet table max on a carnival game across the table and lost it all in 5 minutes without ever winning a hand. He did this twice more. Then left in a hurry. I got off my shift and went out front to leave, and he was pacing around smoking. He told me he lost his entire life savings and he didn't know how to tell his wife. He asked if I wanted to buy his car or anyone that might want to buy it. The most I ever saw someone lose was a few $100,000 by a big-name poker player on dice in like 3 rolls.
That's tough to hear. The cycle of gambling can really mess with people. You get this sense of desperation when someone loses so much in such a short time. It's hard to imagine dealing with that kind of loss, especially when it involves family and financial stability. The urge to chase losses can really spiral out of control. It's a risky environment for sure.
I was on vacation in Vegas. I was at the Palms playing blackjack, and one table over was a guy, sitting by himself. Playing every hand with big stacks of black chips. He was losing, and losing, and losing. He looked so depressed but just kept putting down more and more money. It was super depressing to watch. I asked the dealer, clearly this guy has a gambling problem. It's sad to watch. What can a dealer do in that scenario? The answer was obvious, but if we stop dealing to him, we'll get fired immediately.
It's tough to see someone in that situation. Watching someone lose like that can be unsettling. The dealer's response makes sense though. It's a reminder of how serious gambling can be for some people. Just a sad part of the scene in places like Vegas.
Not a dealer, I was in Vegas, staying at the Aria. Walked down to the casino at 6:30 a.m., heading out to go to Red Rock Canyon in the early morning. Stopped by a roulette table where one Asian guy was playing. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, hair all disheveled, wearing a gray track suit. He's surrounded by suits, pit bosses, managers, etc. He's throwing chips down on the table like they're going out of style. Stacks of 4 or 5 chips, and 15 or 20 bets across the board. Conservatively 60 chips per bet. Then, I noticed the color. They're yellow chips. $1,000 each. He just laid minimum $60,000 on the table. I grab my wife and say, holy shit, we need to watch this guy for a minute. They spun the wheel, he missed on the number, but won on 2 sides, on 2 corners, on the color and on the 12s. Now, I don't know at this point if he was up or down on that individual bet. The croupier raked the money, paid him his winnings, and then the guy did it again. And again. And again. We watched him for 5 spins. Again, conservatively, he gambled $300K in 10 minutes. We had to run, but that was a hell of an experience just watching someone like that. We gambled $80. My wife won 80, and I lost 40. That was it.
That's quite a scene at the casino. Watching someone bet so much money so quickly is something else. The guy clearly had no fear or maybe just didn't care. It's wild to see that kind of action in real time. Meanwhile, you and your wife kept it low-key with a small gamble. Overall, sounds like a memorable morning in Vegas.